because according to Chachamim, it's mom and hedyot. Now we go to Daf Lamed Ches. Okay, sorry. That was Rabbi Yossi's opinion about what Rab Meir would hold. Rav Asi's opinion. Matzis of Ma'aser Sheni, but if you have matzis of Ma'aser Sheni, the different Rab Meir, according to Rab Meir, ein adam yotze yidei chavasai. A person would not be yotze his chayvos b'Pesach because it's not your matzah. And the Torah says that the matzah that you yotze the night of Pesach has to belong to you, and this is not really yours. It's like eating like a korban. And therefore, it's from Hashem's. It's not yours. It's not yours. The Divrei Chachamim yoytze bo yedei chavasar b'Pesach. You could be yoytze with the chayvus your chayvus b'Pesach because the Chachamim hold that the Ma'aser Sheni is yours. You're even allowed to be mekadesh a woman with it. It's your possessions. You just have to eat it with kedusha. That's case number 2. Esrog shel Ma'aser Sheni. Let's say you have an esrog of Ma'aser Sheni. According to Rab Meir, it's not your esrog. L'dir Rab Meir, ein yoytze bo yedei chavasar b'Yontiv. You're not yoytze the first day of Yontiv when there's a chiyuv to have an esrog for everybody. You're not yoytze the chiyuv of holding a lulav and esrog. The different chachamim, other yoytze day chavasar b'Yontiv. You're yoytze in Yontiv, the first day of Yontiv. Okay, so simple. Maskif lo Rav Papa. So Rav Papa asked the question. I see Bishlam Isa by the case of challah, by the dough. I understand why, according to Rab Meir, you would not be yoytze, you wouldn't have to take off challah. Diksiv, it says in the pasuk, Ari Soisechem. It has to be your dough. Mishalachem, it has to belong to yours. And according to Rab Meir, Ma'aser Sheni is not yours. That's why you're potter from giving challah. Okay, that makes sense. Esrog Nami, Diksiv, how do you know an esrog has to belong to you the first day of Yontiv? How do you know that? Maybe you could use a borrowed esrog or a stolen esrog. Because the pasuk says, "L'kachtem lechem, lechem mishlachem yeh." It has to be yours. Fine. Matzah, miksiv matzaschem. Does the Torah say that you have to take your matzah? The Torah says just eat matzah. So maybe the Torah would allow you to be yotzeh the mitzvah of matzah with Hashem's matzah, with the Ma'aser Sheni matzah. Who says it has to belong to you? Amar Rava v'temer Rav Yevi b'Shlamya. He said the answer like this: we have Gzeira Shava. Asya lechem lechem. We have a gzeira shava of lechem to challah. Ksiv hacha, it says by the matzah, it's lechem only, right? Ksiv hasam, it says by the mitzvah of challah. When you're going to eat from the food of the land, malahala mishalachem. Just like over there, it's yours. We already established the challah, the dough, in order to be chuyev and challah, obligated challah, it has to be yours. So Afkan mishalachem. So also matzah, also it's derived from the mitzvah of challah that it also has to be yours in order for you to be yotzeh, in order for you yotzeh the mitzvah of matzah. So the Gemara asks a question. The Gemara says like this. Now this was not really stated anywhere that Rab Meir would say such a thing. Rab Meir never discussed this. It's Rav Asi postulating what Rab Meir would hold. It's Rav Amar of Asi. Rav Asi said, he said this, Rab Meir would hold this. And matzah, Rab Meir will hold like that. And esrog, Rab Meir will hold like that. It's not really what he actually said that. So the Gemara says, Lema Masele, let us prove that Rav Asi was correct in his thinking about the opinions of Rab Meir and Rav Chachamim. Because the Brisa says, Isa shel Ma'aser Sheni, Petur min hachallah. Divrei Rab Meir. Rab Meir says in the Brisa that a dough of Ma'aser Sheni is potter from challah, exactly the way Rav Asi thought what Rab Meir would hold. So that seems to be a raya. So the Gemara says, Lema Messiah, why are you saying it in doubt? That maybe it's a raya? Hainu hach, that's a perfect proof. It says that explicitly in the Brisa, the Rab Meir says that Ma'aser Sheni is potter from challah. So it's an exact proof. So the Gemara says, Hachi kama. This is what we mean to say. We only see that Rab Meir holds by challah, it's potter by the mitzvah of challah, it's potter from challah. But maybe there's a possibility to say that matzah and esrog, Rab Meir would hold Ma'aser Sheni is good with them. Why would I say challah would be more strict? So the Gemara is going to say like this: Lema, you want to say mid the pligi Isa, since Rab Meir would argue by Isa by the challah, bahadachnami pligi. Rav Meir argues also by matzah, and he also argues by esrog that you're not yotzeh ma'aser sheni esrog, ma'aser sheni matzah. Fine. Oidilma, but there's a possibility to say shana hosam challah is different. Why? Because the ksiv arisei sechem trei zinne. It says the word arisei sechem. It has to be yours and yours twice. So the fact that the Torah says twice, from there I know that by challah it has to be explicitly yours, absolutely 100%. You own it. But maybe, for example, by esrog, the Torah only says l'kachtem lechem, only says it one time. So I could say that lechem teaches you that you can't borrow an esrog, you can't steal an esrog. But how do you know that ma'aser sheni, which technically it was originally my wheat that I made it ma'aser sheni? How would I know from there that you wouldn't be yotzeh with ma'aser sheni? Maybe Rav Meir would agree, since it doesn't say it twice. There's a possibility Rav Meir would also agree that ma'aser sheni matzah and ma'aser sheni esrog, you would be yotzeh. So that's why it's only a lema messiah. We only see a proof of Rav Meir's opinion regarding challah, but we don't see a proof of what Rav Meir would hold regarding the mitzvah of matzah and the mitzvah of esrog. Now that was the mitzvah of ma'aser sheni. Now, here comes a fascinating Gemara. So what the Gemara is going to say over here, well, let's do it this way. The Gemara is saying over here like this. We're going to talk right now of esrog. We talked about esrog and ma'aser. Now Rav Shimon ben Lakish asks a question, and he says, let's say you're going to make a matzah of ma'aser sheni. So we said ma'aser sheni can be used for matzah according to the Chachamim. Forget about Rav Meir. Ma'aser sheni could be used. But what happens if you took that ma'aser sheni and you made it challah also? In other words, you made a dough of ma'aser sheni, and not only that, you plan on giving that whole dough, basically a part of that dough, to the Kohen. So it's ma'aser sheni and challah at the same time. Now, we learned before that challah alone, if you just have a Kohen has challah, and he has a dough that was gifted to him, he can make matzah out of it. It can be used for matzah. Ma'aser sheni alone, ma'aser sheni by itself, can be used for matzah. Now, why can ma'aser sheni be used for matzah? Why? So if I'm going to remind you of what we learned before. We learned before that the reason why ma'aser sheni is very different than bikurim. Bikurim you could not use for matzah. You remember why bikurim cannot be used for matzah? It's because bikurim could only be eaten in Yerushalayim. Ma'aser sheni, the Gemara said that the ma'aser sheni can be eaten technically outside Yerushalayim. How? If it became tameh. If it became tameh, you have potential to redeem it to money, and eat that food outside the walls of Yerushalayim. So it's not restricted to be only eaten in Yerushalayim. In other words, the Torah says, "B'chol moishvei seichem toichlu matzos." Matzos has to be such a food that technically it can be eaten anywhere in Jerusalem, in Eretz Yisrael. Now, if you have bikurim, if a kohen has bikurim matzah, that matzah can only be eaten in Jerusalem. So therefore, bikurim matzah is out. It can't be used. But ma'aser sheni technically could be only eaten in Jerusalem. But what's the problem? Ma'aser sheni has a trick. The trick to ma'aser sheni is that if this ma'aser sheni would become tameh, technically you could transfer that kedusha of that ma'aser sheni onto money. And that matzah technically can be eaten anywhere in Jerusalem, anywhere outside of Jerusalem, because the kedusha can be transferred off of it. So
you're talking accidentally.
Accidentally. But very beautiful point. And that's the point. It's theoretically, since this is a possibility that could happen, that's called hoyel. That's why we say, that's why it's okay. In other words, since this possibility you couldn't even make it, not really. Technically, I could purposely make a ma'aser sheni tameh and transfer it. And therefore, since it's in my power to do so, therefore ma'aser sheni matzah is kosher. So again, Ma'aser sheni alone can be used for ma'aser. Ma'aser sheni challah matzah. If a kohen has challah that he made into a matzah, if it just was challah, it can also be used for matzah. Challah does not restrict it. But the problem is when you make ma'aser sheni into challah, the problem is that even if you would be mitama it, if you would be mitama this fruits, you can't eat it anymore because challah that becomes tameh can't be eaten, and therefore you lose the ability to move it around. That's the whole Gemara. Here it is. Boyer Resh Lakish, Boyer Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Ma'u sheyetzi adam bechallah. Is it possible to be Yosef with challah shel ma'aser sheni b'Yerushalayim? So the Gemara says, Aliba del Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Certainly, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Yossi Aglili said, by the way, you can never be Yosef with ma'aser sheni. As we said before, Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion is that ma'aser sheni, because it cannot be eaten in only with simcha, not with aninis, and he darshans from lechem oni, that this is a food that cannot be eaten when you're an onen. So therefore, Rabbi Yosef is over the opinion that ma'aser sheni alone cannot be eaten for matzah. So therefore, that is not the question. That is not leiti boila. Chashta b'chulin loy nafik b'chalasim b'boya. If it was just ma'aser sheni alone, a regular plain ma'aser sheni, you wouldn't be yotza. Certainly, with the challah of ma'aser sheni, you're not going to be yotza. Hita boilach. When is my question? Aliba de Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva's opinion is ma'aser sheni alone, you could be yotza. So b'chulin who denafik, you could be yotza with regular ma'aser sheni of chulin. Why? There's a problem of b'chol ma'aser seichem. The answer is because technically with regular ma'aser sheni, the imitma, if you would be mitama, yesh lehem heta b'maishavas. You could bring it technically outside Jerusalem. Avachala, regular challah. Now that you added another name to this ma'aser sheni, it's not only ma'aser sheni, but it's challah also. The mitama, if it becomes tameh, less leheta b'mashavos, you can't take it around and eat it anywhere because it's really like truma that became tameh, and therefore you have to burn it. L'sreifa azla, you're supposed to burn it. Loy nafik, so therefore you would not be yotza with challah ma'aser sheni. Or dilma amrinan, there's a possibility you could say, like theoretically, it could be good. Hoyel, since the ilu loikara le'ashem, if I did not call it by the name of challah, if I theoretically didn't call it challah, the itme and vitame, and it became tame, that means it was just called ma'aser sheni and became tame. Isle heta b'maishavos v'nafik, but it would have heta to eat it anywhere around, and you would be yotza. Hashtaname nafik. So also now you would say you're yotza. So the answer is that theoretically this fruit didn't have to be what it is. I caused it to become challah by calling it challah. So since technically it did not have to become challah, so I would say theoretically if I did not call it a shame challah, and it would have become tameh, and I would have been able to redeem it and carry it and eat it anywhere. So therefore, now that it's challah and ma'aser sheni, perhaps you are yotze. That's one way to learn. Ikadei amre, others learn havadei loiti boilach. That is certainly not a question. The vadei amrin and hoyel. You certainly say hoyel. Theoretically, you didn't have to call it challah. Certainly, you would be yotze. Kita boilach. When was Rosh Shimon ben Lakish's question? Challah halakuach b'chesef ma'aser sheni. Challah that was bought. This is a second degree challah that was bought with ma'aser sheni. What happened? You have wheat growing. Let's say you live in, Tel Aviv, right? And you have wheat growing. And then you took the wheat and made ma'aser sheni out of it. And then you transferred it into money and then brought the money into Jerusalem and bought matzah with it or bought a dough with it or something like that. You made a dough with it. You bought with the kesef, that's money. And now you made a matzah out of it. So it's challah that was bought with the money of ma'aser sheni. So it's 1 degree removed. So what should be the difference? The difference is that there is an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda who holds that once you already redeemed it one time and you bought food with it, you cannot redeem it back. In other words, if I took the Ma'aser Sheni, the original Ma'aser Sheni, turned it into money, and then bought other food with it, and that food became Tameh, I cannot transfer it back, the Kedusha, back to money. So now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're going to have to say 2 times Hoil. The Gemara is going to explain. Chala that was bought with the money of Ma'aser Sheni. I have no question according to Rabbanan. Since the Rabbanan would hold that even things that were bought with the money of Ma'aser Sheni, so it's once removed from Ma'aser Sheni, so that's the same thing as regular Ma'aser Sheni, and you say Hoil. Since I didn't have to call it Chala, it has a din of something that I can bring it around B'chol Moishvus. My question is only Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar Yikaber. Rabbi Yehuda says, forget about it. Once you transferred it one time into money and then bought food with it and then became Tameh, Rabbi Yehuda says you can't redeem it again. That's now we learned this Mishnah. Something that was bought with the money of Ma'aser Sheni that became Tameh, you pay it again, redeem it, turn it back into money. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Yikaber, you have to bury it. So now, Mi Amrina, according to Rabbi Yehuda, since you could say, Hoyel, if theoretically, if it was never bought, if I didn't transfer it into money, right? And you would say, or I didn't call it a shame challah. In other words, I never transferred it into money. I never made challah onto it. It was just the original Ma'aser Sheni, the way I grew it in Tel Aviv, be Tameh and it became Tameh. Then yesh lehetem, after I bring it into Yerushalayim, yesh lehetem b'mashavas v'nafik, you would have the ability to eat it anyway in all your areas, and you would be yoitza v'nafik hashtaname nafik. So also right now you could be yoitza with it. Oidilma, do you say chad hoyel amrinim? One time you say theoretically hoyel, 3 hoyel lo amrinim. 2 hoyels we don't say. So you would to say this twice over. Theoretically, if you didn't buy, if you left it in its original form, and theoretically, if you didn't call chal on it, so you have to say this theoretically hoyel sins. Do you say it that way? Maybe you don't say it. Only one time you give it, but not 2 times. The same, whatever you hold by meiser, you would hold by kesef halakuach bekesef meiser sheni. In other words, it doesn't matter. As Rashi explains, it doesn't matter. You also yoitze with halakuach because at the end of the day, it comes from the original meiser, and we're not going to make that more strict than the original meiser. In other words, if the original meiser chala, you're going to say that you yoitze, even if it's chala. So then, if you go 1 degree removed by first transferring it to money, then buying a wheat with it, making a matzah out of it, and then calling a challah, it would be nonsensical to make that more stricter than the original one. Next, new Gemara. We learned in the Mishnah Chalas Toida Rikike Nozer. The Mishnah says that that there are 30 matzahs that are brought with a carbon toida. That means it means you just bake 30 matzahs in different ways, and you give 1 to the Kohen, right? So a Rikike Nazir and the wafers of a Nazir. So the Nazir that brought a carbon, and in his carbon he had to eat some matzah. A guy who had to bring a carbon toida, and in his carbon he had to bring a chalas, which is like a thick type of matzah. The din is they can be yoitza, so it depends. It's not clear. But depends if you're yoitza or not. Pashtus, you're not yoitza matzah with it. Now the Gemara says, "Minohani mili." How do I know you're not yoitza if you eat matzah? If you use that matzah for your seder night, you're not yoitza. Amar Rabba, the Rabba says the Amakra because the pasuk says ushmartem es matzos. So we have to keep the matzah. So we darshan matzah hamishmeres l'shem matzah. If the matzah was watched, and you had in mind that when you're baking it, you're going to use it for the matzah on Leil Pesach, that will be a good matzah. Yatzutzu, this is the exception. She'ein mishtameres l'shem matzah. You didn't watch it for matzah. Elu shem zevach. Your intention was to use it for the carbon, not for matzah. Your intention was to only have it for the carbon, and that's one way. Okay, so you need the matzah to be made the shem matzah of mitzvah Pesach, not the shem matzah of zeva. Rav Yosef says, Amakra, the pasuk says, Shivas yamim matzos toichelu. You have to eat the matzah for 7 days. So, but when you bring a carbon toida, that matzah could only be eaten like the carbon itself, which means that matzah could only be eaten for 2 days and a night. Matzah, a day and a night. Matzah nechel shivas yomim, a matzah that's eaten for 7 days, that is good for matzah. Of course, this is not eaten for 7 days, only for one day and night. And even if you didn't shech the carbon, let's say you just designated it for a carbon toida, but you didn't shech the carbon for the carbon toida yet, so technically you can eat this matzah anywhere, right? So you have a heta to eat this for 7 days. But when you made it, you wouldn't have in mind to do it l'shem matzvah. You had in mind to do it l'shem carbon. So technically, as Rashi explains, Rav Yosef agrees with Rabba's opinion that the real reason is ushmartem es matzahs. That's a very important point. He agrees with this reason that you needed to have in mind that you're watching this for the mitzvah of Leil Seder, not for l'shem zebach. But he says the Tanakama Rabba would say that if you have in mind to not only watch it l'shem zevach, but let's say you had in mind, I'm watching it for l'shem to use it for my seder also, then you technically, according to Rabbah, you would be yaitza. But Rabbi Yosef says no. Even if you would have in mind l'shem matzah, so you lose the first pasuk, but I have another pasuk. But since this is something that is going to be eaten only for 1 day and a night, therefore you wouldn't be yaitza, even if you had in mind that you're going to use it for seder night. So that's a very important point. Tanya kavasa de Rabbah and Tanya kavasa de Rabbi Yosef. Tanya kavasa de Rabbah that yochel yaitzi de kavasa b'chalas toida kika matzah Talmud loimer shmartem es matzah matzah mishtamer shem matzah yatzu shem mishtamer shem matzah shem zevach. So that's the one pasuk that this brisa brings down. Tanya kavasa the Rabbi Yosef yochel yaitzi adam li kavasa b'chalas toida kika nazeh Talmud loimer shivas yom matzah techelu matzah nechaz shiva yatzu shem nechaz shiva. So we have brises. I guess these brises were taught much earlier than when the Zamaroyim lived, that say exactly what the reason why you're not yaitza, the mitzvah of you're not yaitza matzah with chalas matzah rekiki naza. So now the Gemara asks just 3-4 kashas and that's it. The tepik leim lechem oni. Let's say, why can't you learn it out from lechem oni? Right? Just like Rabbi Elyosi Aglili said, you're not yoitza. You're not yoitza when you eat ma'aser sheni because it cannot be eaten by aninus. So this also, you're not yoitza because we darshan mishan echal ba'aninus. Yoitza said this, excluding the chalas matzah, chalas toida, rekike matzah, rekike nazir she'ein echal ba'aninus ela b'simcha. You have to be happy when you eat it because it's part of a carbon. It's not allowed to be eaten when you're einin. So why didn't we learn that good drasha to teach you that chalas toiden and rekike nazir you're not yaitza? And says the Gemara, Savalak Rabbi Akiva. We hold like Rabbi Akiva, Dama Einiksiv. We look at the way it's written, and written. It's not written with an aleph. It's written with an ayin, and it's pronounced Eini. So we don't darshan aninas. Fine. The Gemara asks a simple question, but these chalas of the toida and the nazir were made with oil. The tepikle davalei matzah ashira. It's a rich matzah, so it was made with oil, and we learned that before. You're not yoitza with matzah ashira. Amar Shmuel Rav Yitzchak. It was a small amount of oil they put in. Reviyasi u'mischalekes li lekama chalas. It's a small kiddush cup that's for all these 30 matzahs, right? For the 10 matzahs, but it was a very little amount of oil. Most of the what it was comprised of was water, so therefore it's not really matzah shira. What's called matzah shira if it's only made with oil or fruit juice, but not if it's just a drop of oil. The tepik lay. So now the Gemara asks, let's answer this question. The problem is the ein nechalas b'chol ma'shavos. It was impossible to eat it outside Jerusalem. A chalas toida and rekike matzah, you took it back to your place in Jerusalem and ate the meat with the matzah there. So that's a good, perfect excuse why you shouldn't be yaitzer. It says b'chol moshvesechem toichlu matzahs, and here you can't eat it wherever you want in Eretz Yisrael. Amar shlakes zoysemeres chalas toida rekike nazar necholim b'nei v'giva. the chalas toida rikike naza were allowed to be eaten all around Israel when the Mishkan was in Noiv in Givon. As you know, I don't know if, as you know, the Mishkan was in Shiloh, and then it got destroyed in the times of Eli. And then it went to Noiv. And then the city of Noiv was destroyed by Shaul HaMelech because they gave food to David. And then it went to Givon. So during the time of when then Shlomo built the Beis Hamikdash. So during the time when the Mishkan was built, when the Mishkan was actually in Noiv and Givon, the Aron wasn't there. The Aron was still in the hands of the Plishtim, but they didn't return it so fast. But during that time, if you brought a chalas toida rikike nazar, so then you can eat the chalas toida rikike nazar, which were allowed to be brought onto in that place, because not everybody holds of that. Only Rav Shimon holds of that. When it was brought, if you brought a chalas toida rikike nazar, technically at that time you could have eaten the chalas toida rikike nazar anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, technically, there's a possibility of chalas toida rikike nazar being eaten anywhere in Eretz Yisrael during the time when the Mishkan was in Noiv and Givon. And therefore, chalas toida is not limited by the pasuk of B'chol Moish Vayseichem, because it technically at a certain period in Jewish history it was allowed to be eaten anywhere. If you look in Rashi at the bottom here, I mean, it's good to look into from this point and on. Rashi gives you the history. When he gives you the history which I just described to you over here, the history of the Mishkan from the time that they went into Eretz Yisrael till the time the Beis Hamikdash was built. One more piece, Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. Omar Rabbi Elaish. Rabbi Elaish says, "Sha'alti, I asked," as Rabbi Eliezer, "Mahu sheyetzi adam mechalas toider kikinazir." Now this is an open Mishnah. Our Mishnah says he can't be yaitza. So apparently Rabbi Eliezer, who never learned from his teachers this Mishnah, Amali, so Rabbi Lezer answered, Rabbi Elai, Lo Shamati, I never heard it. I don't know what the answer is. So Rabbi Elai said, I went to Rabbi Yeshua. Amali, he told me, Hare Amru, it's a Mishnah, or it's a known fact. If you made it for your own carbon, you only wanted to use it for your own carbon, ain't other yaitza but the head. You're not yaitza but it. Limka b'shuk. But if you're a baker that bakes chalas toida and rikike nazir for the people who are mechuyev in those karbanos, so your mind that you want to sell it, right? Then if you decide to use it for yourself, you would be yaitza. Now the Gemara is going to explain why. So when I told Rabbi Lezer what Rabbi Yeshua said, that there's a difference who made the chalas toida and rikike nazir, Amalei, he told me, Bris, I swear to you, this is one of the halachas sent to Moshe B'Sinai. I guess he wanted to strengthen it. I don't know if it's not a halacha of Moshe B'Sinai. It seems to make perfect sense, as the Gemara is going to explain. So, Ike de Amrei, others says, Bris, I swear to you, he gave it to you without any reason. He just said, like, that's the halacha. He didn't, like, time and boya. He didn't give you a reason. When someone asks you a question, you have to give them the reason so that they fully understand what you're saying. The time am I. So what is the difference? Rabba said, if you're selling it, if you're a baker selling chalas toida kukanazar, call a shuk, anything that's sold from the street, imloichim mimlach, you could change your mind. Because Amar, you say to yourself, Ms. David, if I sell it for another person who needs to bring a toida or nazir, Ms. David, I'll sell it. But Eloi Ms. David, if I'm never going to sell it, I want to use it for my own matzah and not make it part of a carbon or anything like that. So since you had that in mind, therefore, that if you're a baker, you'll be yaitza even when you don't sell it and end up keeping it for yourself. But a regular person is not a seller. He for sure can never use that chalas toida or kikam nazir for matzah. Very good.
Very good.
All right, very interesting Gemara. Every time the Gemara brings up kachim or chalas and everything like that, the Gemara goes into it.
Yeah, you get a whole survey of Shas.
Right, a ma'aseh sheni that is chala.
Right. Right. But you have to know certain principles about Meiser Sheni, when it can be eaten, where it can't.
Right.
The
Exactly.
cows are all at the same time. Very good.
Okay.
Yes, Kaya.
Gute Nacht.
Yeah, good enough.